Well, here we are finally. I'm sitting here with Gary Italiander, and we are doing a live interview where we can actually interact and hear each other without having sound go. So hopefully this will be a an interesting conversation for you. So today we are talking about Gary Italiander as well as his dad and his journey on writing a book and so much more. So for those of you are just joining us, we are going to be covering things like, Gary's journey on writing a book, his journey with, putting news out there about his dad's story and the power of storytelling. We're also going to be talking about his journey, and he's going to give us a little bit about his music side of things, and hopefully get him to play the harmonica. And we're also going to be giving you lots of tips and things that only come through a life of experience that gives you the insights on how you can go and do business better, PR better, maybe even write your own book one day, and the power of storytelling. And as those of you who've been on my Life Hacks with Max channel before, you may have seen an interview with Gary before where he tells his story, and a phenomenal one. But today's going to have a slight twist because Gary has got an incredible story to tell. So without kind of further ado, what I'd like to do is just, Gary, if you could give us a kind of a few minutes intro into the incredible life that you've had. I mean, it kind of does injustice when you try and ask somebody to summarize it in a couple of minutes.
But I can do that. So, well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this interview. I started out at the age of about four and a half, being introduced to some instruments, apparently, because I don't remember this, but I was shown a few instruments at a cousin's house, and I picked up the harmonica. That was the one that for some reason attracted me, maybe because it was small and I was small, and I picked it up, and I was able to get recognizable tunes out of it. As I say, I don't remember any of this, but the outcome of that was that I was gifted the harmonica, and it became very, very important to me, and I became a lover of music. And actually, I remember at the age of about 7, we had a visit from the somebody representing the BBC just turned up at the house doing a they were checking up on what kids watched and listened to, and they said to me, what radio station do you listen to in the morning? And I said Radio 3, and they said, but Radio 3 is not on in the morning. And I said, well, yes, of course it is. And when she checked her notes, she realised that she hadn't come across a kid that listened to Radio 3, and so she simply didn't know. So I then got involved with learning the piano. I was given a scholarship to the music college, London College of Music, and I was there for 3 years, from 12 to 15. Then we went to live in America for 2 years. We came back, and I had an audition with the director of the college, whose name was Lloyd Webber. It was Andrew and Julian's father. I was given a place on the course for 3 years. I became a qualified piano teacher. And then I went to Reading University, and I got my qualifications to teach music. And actually at that point decided this is not really the direction that I want to go with the music, because it wasn't what I wanted. So I then changed to photography, and that started a whole new journey. But you referred to the harmonica, and you said maybe I'd play something. So I thought I'd just give you a quick blast. This is I play what's known as a chromatic harmonica. It's the one that's got a little button on the side, which is very crucial. And so it means that effectively it's like having a piano without, if you didn't have this little button, it would be a piano without the black notes. This gives you the half tones, which for me as a musician is very, very important. And so just to give you a little idea of what it sounds like.
You make that look far too easy.
So then I, having got to the stage in my life where I was actually teaching, but I got this interest in photography. I'd been lent a camera by my father. I'd gone on a holiday for a few days. I'd come back with a roll of film, as you did in those days, taken it to the chemist. The chemist processed it, went back to see what had come out. And the chemist's question to me when I went to get the film was, "Are you a professional?" Which really threw me, because I didn't really know what he was talking about. But the pictures had come out really well. And obviously, like I had this aptitude for music, I had an aptitude for taking photographs. I had an eye for that. And then a bit further down the road, I decided to investigate whether this was the right direction for me, because it's what I wanted to do. And I wrote to people, which is kind of what I do. And Patrick Litchfield, Lord Litchfield, the Queen's cousin, invited me to his studio, and I met him twice, and those meetings were quite important for me. But I met other people as well, and I started on the photographic journey, and within a comparatively short time I was invited to open the portrait studio at Harrods. And that was I was there for 4 years. It wasn't an easy time at all, because Harrods is not an easy place to run a business. Yeah. That's a whole other story. But the reality is that I was dealing with some of the most influential people in the world, certainly the richest people in the world. There's lots of stories that relate to things that happened to me. Things like going to somebody's house and walking into a room and thinking this is a nice room, and then realizing it was the lift. Things like that. Being told that a plane was on a runway and it wasn't going anywhere until the pictures were ready. That kind of world is very different to what most people ever come across. And I made lots of connections, and that led on right at the beginning of going to Harrods, I was introduced to somebody who was so influential in my life because of this instrument. And his name was Larry Adler. And Larry was the foremost harmonica player, because he had transformed, he'd taken the harmonica and he'd created the situation where people would play it in a performance on a concert stage. Nobody else had done that. There were people that played jazz on it. It's often known as the blues harmonica, but that's not this one. That's the one without the little button. And that's what most people play. And it's a totally different thing. You can't play classical music on it because it's not designed for that. And very few people play the chromatic harmonica. So I always wanted to meet Larry. I had photographed a lot of very well-known people, which was great. I loved doing that. But and I love photographing everybody. It doesn't matter whether they're famous or not. But I always wanted to meet Larry, and that happened in 1995. Much to my amazement, we became friends. I never expected that to happen. And I knew him from 95 to 2001, the last 6 years of his life. And when he passed away, I had this idea to record my thoughts about him as a tribute. But because of the type of approach that I had to it, I decided that actually the tribute would be relevant to other people to be able to have their say. And so contacts went out by me and by other people that I made connections with, and people like Sting and Cher and Sir Michael Parkinson, who sadly just passed away, and Sir George Martin, who produced all the Beatles albums, and Itzhak Perlman. All these people and many more wrote their own contribution to the book. And the outcome of all of that, and because of the way that I made contact with people and so on, Peter Stringfellow gave me Stringfellows for the book launch, which was amazing. And in fact, a year after that, I decided I wanted to do an evening about Larry, and Peter Stringfellow gave me Stringfellows again for that occasion. So that was very special, very, very special. And so that kind of gives you a background. When I'd written the book about Larry Adler, people started saying to me, well, will you come and talk to us about it? And the outcome of that was that I became a guest speaker. That was something that grew. And today I talk all over the world on cruise ships, which I love. I like meeting people. I like to deliver the stories that I have about a whole host of things. But in the talks that I give, I only talk about things that I have personal experience of. So it's not a subject that I'm interested in. It's actually
life experience.
It's a life experience for me. So I do a talk about why it takes a year to build a Steinway piano. I was very fortunate to own a Steinway piano. I know a lot about the piano. And when I did that, I actually interviewed Lang Lang, who is probably the biggest name on the planet when it comes to classical piano. Apparently, when he played at the Beijing Olympics, 40 million Chinese took up the piano, which
Wow.
is staggering. And people like Ashkenazi. I did a project where I was, which started my own interviewing. I was asked to do a project with the '66 World Cup winners, quite relevant, having just had
And the female
yesterday and doing so brilliantly. But when the '66 World Cup winners in later life, I was invited to go and photograph them, and then I was asked to interview them, which was something I'd never done before. And so, a little bit like we're doing here, we did these interviews, and it started me also on another journey in that direction as well. So that kind of sums up.
Wow, that was like a whirlwind travel through a lot of experience. But this is one of the reasons why I think this interview is so important. Is, you know, you've alluded to quite a few things there, and you know, if you read between the lines, you see not only the long journey and the copious amount of experience, but the kind of key things that led to all these things happening.
Yeah.
And you know, we're going to touch base on that in a bit, because I've got several questions to ask you about that and your journey along the way, so that, you know, those that are listening have the ability to gain some insight into being able to build something that is long lasting and you know, leaves a legacy as well, and we'll get into that. But you know, today we're touching base on the journey of what your dad has created, this book that you've now written, and your dad was a phenomenal man that had achieved so much, and you know, from our prior discussion to the interview, left you with quite a bit of artwork to wade through, should we say?
Well, my father was significant in lots of ways, particularly where my own life is concerned, because I am very fortunate that I'm very creative, and I'm not only creative on one level. So my creativity is not just music, and it's not just photography, but I enjoy building furniture, which I do occasionally. I enjoy with photography, if there's a discussion, a corporate discussion about how do we take these particular photographs, then I enjoy that side of it, because it's not just a question of photographing something, but you have to work out what's going to work from the corporate perspective. And I very much enjoy working to that kind of brief. And sometimes you get bizarre situations where you might go abroad, as I've had happen, you don't get a brief, and then you're a bit flummoxed, and you think to yourself, I've got to create a brief that makes sense. And at the end of the process, they're going to be happy with, because they don't know what they want and they've left me a blank canvas. So I've had that happen before. But generally, when you're working with corporate clients, they have something specific that they're looking for. They won't necessarily know
exactly
how to.
Yeah.
They won't know how to do it, and they won't know even necessarily quite what they're looking for, but they know kind of roughly to put you in that picture. With my dad was very much one directional with his creativity. He was an artist, but he was an artist on a number of different levels. And there were times where the funny thing was that I remember he could speak in a way that made you feel confident that he knew what he was talking about. So it might be, he'd say, we need a new light fitted in the hall and I can do that. And you listen to him and you think, wow, he knows exactly what he's doing. But actually he didn't have a clue. And by the time he'd finished, and I remember one occasion where he finally, after about 4 hours, got the light to work, but it couldn't actually be turned off. It was permanently on, at which point we had to call in the electrician to sort the thing out. So, but
that level of confidence.
But the level of confidence was there. But my father also was very creative, also with words. So when my father came from the East End of London, and he came at a time when people went out to work, you got a job. And he very early on, at about the age of 3, so a bit younger than me with the harmonica, started to take an instinctive approach to drawing and painting, and fell in love with it. And at the point in time where people in the family were saying, you need to go and get a job, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're earning money, The money was, yes, of course, we all need to earn money, but that was not the driving force. And I have to say, it's never been my driving force either, albeit that we all need to earn money. So he was, his brother and his father were very supportive and said, you should go to art college. Unfortunately, his father, my grandfather, died when my father was only 14.
Oh, wow.
And it was about the time that my father then went to art college. And by the age of 16, 17, he was already working in an advertising agency, but it was right close to the beginning of the war. And things were in Europe were beginning to become unsettled. And the agency that he worked for actually closed. And the man who owned the agency said, I'm retirement age, there's a war that most likely is coming, and I've decided to close my business. And a group was formed of war artists, and my father was the youngest war artist in the country, and he was 17. So his journey of going into the army was still a couple of years away. And what would happen was that they'd go, in fact, at the point in which the war started, he was 17. So his journey into the army happened a couple of years into the war. But things were beginning to happen. There were bombing raids over Germany, and the pilots would come back with reports, and the artists would create a painting to show what they'd seen. And that was what my father did until he was called up. But when he got called up, his journey then became unusual because he was a war artist. So coming from a Dutch family and speaking fluent Dutch, very early on in the 6 weeks basic training, they invited my father, I use the word invited sort of in inverted commas, they invited my father to go to Holland immediately on his own, being dropped in by parachute, which effectively is a lone spy, and it was effectively a one-way ticket. And he said, this is not for me, and it wasn't an instruction, you had a choice for that. And there were some people who would accept that, but he didn't want to do that. He said, definitely not. And they said, well, in that case, the officer that was interviewing him said, in that case, will you paint my portrait? And so he was taken off all duties and painted a portrait instead of being dropped into occupied territory on his own. So quite an alternative situation.
Sure.
And then when the 6 weeks training was up, you went off to fight. But my father was the single soldier from his group of thousands of soldiers that was sent to North Wales to paint, because he was in training to become a cartographer drawing maps. And because of that route, it took him down an avenue which was very, very different to what most people would experience. So the first day of walking into the camp, the first person he saw, and again he was on his own with his kit, was an officer. And he immediately dropped his bag, saluted the officer, and the officer looked at him and said, you must be new, we don't do that here. It was a bit like a holiday camp, because for 6 months he was practicing drawing, and on the weekends they would go to the local main part of the town for dances, and the people living in the town were in a place called Raben, which is beautiful in North Wales. They would bring food up to the camp for the soldiers and so on. So it was a very, very, very different and protected life. And then when he was eventually sent to the Middle East, there are lots and lots of stories that happened to him, which I decided that I would write a book about. And actually he was, when I said to him, I'd like to write this book, he was very, very against it. And I think—
So why was that?
The reason he was against it was because he didn't want to be seen as if he was saying, I'm something special, because all these millions of people that fought and many that died, that he'd had effectively a great time and he'd come back unscathed, and he didn't want the wrong kind of message to go out. And for a long time, I tried to get him to agree, and that the defining moment was when my daughter Elise wanted to go, was about to start to try and get into the publishing world. And I said, if I write the book, she'll do the editing and it would be good for her. And that was the moment when he said, okay, fine. And so I started to write it. And because of my father's creativity, I knew that he could do cartoons. And I said, I'd like you, with each of the short stories, I'd like you to do a cartoon to go with the story. And so he did that. So The book started to develop, but again, being the kind of person that I am, I felt that it needed a significant forward, and I managed to get Dame Vera Lynn, who of course is such a huge name in this country,
Absolutely.
the late Dame Vera Lynn, to agree to write the forward, and I made that contact, and she wrote something that was very special for the opening of the book. Sadly, when the book was published in May this year, she was no longer with us, and my father had passed away a couple of years earlier. But I have to say that actually that was significant in what I wrote, because it changed a lot of the way that the book developed,
Sure.
because a lot more got added into it.
And I mean, one of the things, and I've got loads of different questions, and hopefully, what for those of you that are watching, you can drop your comments in the comment section below. Ask any questions that you may have of Gary and his journey, and the journey of his dad. But this must have, this is it must have been quite an emotional journey for you as well, because I know from knowing you for a while, wanting to start this prior to your dad's passing, and then so much happening in between. And your dad, how old was he?
He was
again?
98.
98.
And
so
still painting at 97.
and I mean, that is incredible. And I can relate to having family members that get so close to that century mark, where you kind of hope that that's that they make it just to kind of get there. But the journey itself, I mean, 98 years worth of stories and incredible artwork that he did.
Yeah.
But there was also lots of artwork that you and he collaborated on.
There is. I mean, I have to add that my father was 98 and he just turned 98, but my mother was just coming up to 97, and sadly they passed away 5 weeks apart. But they were both active literally throughout their lives. Now, you don't often get that. My parents had been married for 74 years, which is colossal. But they were both active and both involved, and both. When people met them, they would come away going, "Wow, that was amazing," because that's the kind of people that they were, and that's a real legacy for me, because I'm at an age where I could, definitely, I'm of retirement age, past the bit of retirement age. But when people say to me, will you retire, or are you going to retire, or are you retired? The answer is definitely no. I'm busy doing lots and lots of different things, and I love all the things that I'm doing. And some of them are business related and some of them aren't. But I saw my parents doing all of those things all those years. And I think, as somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody well known said, you don't get old, try and get this right, you don't get old because you stop doing things. You don't stop doing things because you get old because you stop doing things. That's the way around it is. And it's a very true statement that if you're active in every respect, you're likely to stay active longer.
And it's interesting, because I know I've done some research, and I think there's been billions invested into longevity, and everybody wanting to find the secret to the fountain of youth, as it were. But studies have shown that those people that a lot of people that retire, because they have that mental disconnect. It's like, okay, so I've retired, effectively life is over, I don't do anything, and because they're not active and they're not socially active, they've got nothing to almost look forward to on the next day. A lot of people die within 5 years of retirement. And for me, that's a scary thing, because those are the best years to kind of look forward to, because you worked your whole life to get to this milestone. But it's been shown, and I know I had an aunt who, when I used to go visit South Africa and I wanted to book, when I wanted to go and see her, I had to book time in a diary, because it was like, well, which day are you coming? I've got this, and this happening. I was like, you're busier than I am now, and you're in your 90s. I was like, what the heck? But that's one of the secrets to a long
It
life,
is. It is.
because it's having that thing to look forward to, because there's still stuff that you're planning.
Yeah,
and
there was a lady on TV yesterday morning who was taken in an open top plane, a sort of a biplane with 2 seats in it, and taken for a flight because she had a background in that. She was 103
Wow.
and completely with it, and looked years younger. So it is. There's no question that being active and involved, and in many respects, I mean, I look at what I want to achieve and things that I've got kind of listed to do, and there's lots of things, and I don't think I've done it all now, so I can just sit back and relax. I can't, because I've still got, I wake up in the morning and I think I'm never going to get everything done that I need to get done.
But that's living a fulfilling life, because you know that there's so much to do and so much to achieve, and that gives people hope. Because beyond the initial day job, you've created so many other things in your life. You talk about the music side of things, you talk about the photography, about the writing books, and along the way, none of this would happen without one of the key things that you've indirectly referred to, but you haven't quite gone into any detail with. And I'm sure there are people watching that would love to write a book. And everybody at some stage thinks, or asks themselves whether they're worthy to write a book. And what I'd like to do before I go into some of the other detail is, with that writing a book, we don't have to go into publishing a book today, but just kind of an overview of what is needed to successfully actually get a book out there.
So the first thing is, you've got to have something to say, or something that you feel that you want to say, that you feel is worthy of saying. And one of the things that you hear, and I think it's right, is you hear people say, oh, I'd love to write a book. And then you need to start writing. It's as simple as that. And you need to keep writing until you finish it. And that's not easy, because you are effectively, unless you are in a position where somebody comes along and says, we're going to pay you £50,000 down payment to write this book, and we want it by the 20th of, unless you're in that situation, and very few people that write books are, you have to drive yourself forwards with it. So that in itself is hard. And I found both of the books that I've written took me longer than I would have liked them to have taken me. But I got to the end, and I did have to set dates. So when I did the first book, and I found a publisher for that book, a very lovely lady who she was a publisher, but she also happened to be connected with Larry Adler. And she said to me, who's publishing your book? And at that stage I said, I'm not sure yet. And she said, I'd like to publish it. And she said to me, when do you want to complete this? We could aim for doing it this time of the year this year, or this time of the year this year, or this time of the year this year, later and later. And I said, well, let's go for the first date. She said, do you realise what pressure you're putting yourself under, and me as the publisher? And I said, yes, because for me, I need that driving thing. That helps me. And if I have to stay up all night writing, actually that for me personally is beneficial, because I can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, I've got something I want to write, and I can go and write. A lot of people can't do that. It's how I tick. So that is very, very important. And it's in many respects, it's the most important thing. Also, when you start writing, I mean, I've been told many times, been asked many times, when are you going to write your own story? Each time I've asked, I've said, it's too early. It's too early. I'm not ready yet. And I've got other stuff I'm doing. It's not as if I'm not ready for other reasons. I'm working on another book at the moment, so which I know we're going to talk about. So that's something which will come. But the way that I personally do it is you can actually jot down the headings that you want to touch on. So for me personally, even though I'm not writing my own story at the moment, I am thinking about it. And when I think about my story and I look back over my life and things that have happened to me, we talked briefly about those things. But living in America, there's quite a story. There's various stories there which I think people will find interesting. I did a corporate job in Nigeria, which had its own complexities, and I think people will find that very fascinating. So I've kind of got these headings, and you can kind of look back at what it is that you're going to talk about, and then you can say, well, I want to touch on that, and I want to touch on that, and I want to. And once you start putting those things in, you're starting to give a shape.
Yeah, that's where the framework comes from.
So you need to do. For me personally, that's my way. I mean, I think the most difficult thing would be to start writing page 1 and have no thought about where you're going. Because that would be tantamount to getting in the car, start driving, and people say to you, where are you off to? And you go, I don't know, we'll see what happens at the next corner. You can't do that. So you've got to have a plan. And that's my way of writing. But equally, anybody that writes, I mean, if you speak to somebody who is, and I know somebody who is, he writes at least a book a year, and he writes in a particular genre, and he's done very well with his books and his publishing and everything else. He would probably have a very different, in fact, I must ask him, but he probably have a very different approach to how he does what he does, but his books are very different to what I'm writing about.
Yeah.
But I think that the other comment I would make is that if you write a book, unless you are a big name, the chances are you won't make money from it. And if you're setting out to write a book to make money, you're probably wasting your time.
I think that's a really key and important point, because there are millions of people that have been published, but I think when you look at the percentages, less than 10% have actually made a living from that.
Yeah.
And the reality is that in business, a book, and it's something that I'm been putting off, but working on it as well. But it becomes social proof and credit, and it becomes like your business card.
Yes.
And a talking point, and it gives you a position of authority in certain areas when you've published that book.
There's no question about that, because one of the things it does in your working life and in every respect is when people respect you differently when you've achieved certain things because you did it.
Yeah.
So when people, for example, when people say to me, oh, you're a photographer, you photograph weddings, you do this. Well, no, I'm slightly specialised in what I do, and I was based at Harrods for a few years, and people, oh, really? The perspective of how people, the perception of what you have done, and writing a book does a bit of that. It shows that you set out to do something and you complete it, and it's not a one day thing. It's a long drawn out process. And funnily enough, the other day on TV they were reviewing the things about Michael Parkinson, and they showed a bit of film footage very early on where he interviewed Mick Jagger. And at the time, Mick Jagger said, well, he was asked by Michael Parkinson, how long do you think you're going to do with this music thing? And he said, well, we've already done 2 years and we've done very successfully. He said, maybe another year would be good, And of course, we know that's not what happened. But equally, just like you said with the 10% of publishers, I mean, I don't know what the percentages of people in the pop world that became successful, but you hear people from time to time, you go, wow, they're fantastic, but they're never going to make it because of all sorts of things. And so, I know as a classical musician, if you said, I'm going to become a classical
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So hopefully that didn't interrupt the screen too much. Not sure how that came through, but so I think the point there that you make is something that I want to touch base on, because in the world we live in today, a lot of people are out there for, I want to become famous and I want to do it yesterday. And if you look at channels like even YouTube Shorts or TikTok or various other social media platforms,
Yeah.
where people are they want the fame, but they don't want to take the time to do to go through the journey.
Yeah.
And this is the one thing that through all the things you've shared so far, is it didn't happen overnight.
No.
It all came at a cost and an expense and a journey so that there's a story to tell. It's not a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts and advice to those people that are living the immediate gratification lifestyle, but wanting to leave a legacy? I mean,
it's a very interesting question, and it's a very difficult situation, because one of the things that we find that's happened is that when I was a kid, and obviously you're younger than I am, but you're not 20,
Yeah.
so you will understand. So you will have seen a bit of this, not understand, but you will have seen a bit of this, and that is that in the newer life that we lead, the technical life that we lead, there's a tremendous speed with which things happen and change.
Yeah.
And there's an immediacy. People now send text to somebody, and 2 minutes later they go, "Well, they haven't replied." And you think, well, they might not be around to reply. Maybe they're in a meeting. Maybe they're on holiday. Maybe they just don't want to reply now. They'll reply to you when they're ready.
Yeah.
But there's this thought process that everything has to happen instantly, and life never happened like that. I mean, when you think back to, you're from South Africa. If you went back 30 years ago and you had a friend in London and you wanted to speak to them, it would be a phone call.
Yeah.
And it would be an expensive phone call. And you might talk to them for 10 minutes, but you wouldn't see them. And they'd say, I've just been on holiday and I have this great photograph that I took. And you wouldn't see it unless they printed it and sent it to you. And if they printed it and sent it to you, there'd be a process of go through the post, and it might take a week to reach you, maybe longer, whatever it is. And now things are just instantaneous. So that's changed the way people think. The fact that we can sit here and you've got a device that is filming us and it's going out live. You go back 30 years ago, things couldn't happen in that way. So it's changed our thinking. It's readjusted our thinking. And for younger people coming into the world and growing up with all this technology, they think instantly. They think everything happens in an instant, and it doesn't. And actually, there's a benefit to it not happening in an instant. But the problem with that is what I see, there's two elements to this, which I think are important. The first element is that people, when you hear people say, I want to be famous, they don't understand even that fame comes because you did something. So if you just won the World Cup and you're the one that scored the winning goal, you have fame because you did something. But there are people that want to be famous without doing anything. And they don't even understand that fame comes as a result of something. So that's one element. The second element is a different thing, but it's connected. And that is that 20 plus years ago, before we were sort of digital in our approach, there were digital things, but not like they are now. People would want to create a photograph of their family, and they would go to a professional photographer and they'd get something very good done and something special.
Yeah.
They'd make a special occasion of it. They don't do that now. So what happens
a quick selfie.
Yeah, it's a quick selfie.
Which means the quality is
not good. That's one thing. And people will argue, oh, the iPhone's wonderful and all of this kind of thing. That's one thing. But that's not about that. It's about making the occasion and creating the image. And actually what you record it on is not important. The thing about the device you record it on is if you want to do something big for the wall, you need a good quality piece of equipment that's going to give you the result that you can do that with.
Yeah.
And the issue now for me is that people are not taking the quality images of their families that they did 20, 30 years ago, which means that the photographic industry has been hit very badly by the photographers are not getting
There we
We're
go.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption.
So,
Technical glitches. But yeah,
so the thing is that the images that are not taken won't be there in the future. And when people go, oh yeah, but I took a picture on my phone, the quality of what they did, it's a throwaway moment. And we used to talk about these things as snaps, and that's what they are. And I remember seeing Lord Snowdon, the very well-known photographer, going to the biggest camera shop in the world in New York, and they had all these rolls of film in those days, a huge canister, a big pot of all these rolls of film. And he said to the person in the shop, you know, when you look at the pictures that are coming back, how many are good? And he said, very, very few, because they are generally taken by people who enjoy what they're doing, but they don't know about setting something up. And they don't, these weren't portraits, they're just pictures. But today we're missing something. And the result of it will be in the future when someone says, but I don't have, you know, you look back at some of the photographs taken in the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, they're fantastic images because a lot of thought went into it. And you didn't take lots and lots and lots of images. And you hear sometimes, that's what you hear. Sometimes people say, well, if I take 50, 60 pictures, hopefully I'll get a good one. But you should only need to take one picture to get a good one.
Well, it reminds me of when we did the previous interview, and you were telling us the story about all the work that it took, and you know it's almost like an orchestra. You know, you had to get everything to just the right moment to set the scene for the photograph when you were doing the airlines in Nigeria.
Yes.
And then you go up and it's click, and then you know that's it.
Yeah.
But and I think that the misunderstanding or the myth there is that, you know, people see a photographer go click and they go, well,
it's easy.
It's easy, but they don't see everything that goes in the background.
Absolutely.
And the work and the, you know, looking at the lighting and you know, the composition of what goes in. And you know, I was lucky enough to study photography and work with an incredible photographer, and even have the beauty of being able to smell the chemicals when you develop your own photographs. And you know, it still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. But that whole process of creating a memory, because it's not just an image, it's a memory that you are trying to replicate.
Part of it, yeah.
And it's, you know, because of the snapshot moment, we don't captivate that. So if you look at, you know, and I work with a lot of people on social media and LinkedIn and that kind of thing, and a lot of people have, you know, interesting images as their headshots, but they don't take time to realize the impact that headshot makes, and the influence that has on somebody's decision when working with you, as an example.
And actually, I would qualify that by saying that one of the people I photographed many years ago was Frankie Vaughan, and Frankie Vaughan was a very well-known entertainer in Britain. He was in a film with Marilyn Monroe. It was very significant. He was very well-known, very successful. And when I photographed him, I was putting together a set of pictures for an exhibition, which he opened. So he came along. It was very kind of him to come along and be the main person there. And he was a huge name. And he came in and he looked around the exhibition with a lot of people. And then at a certain point in time, he gave a speech. And I had no idea what he was going to say, of course. But the thing that he came out with really, I've never forgotten, and it was very, very important. And he said, when I saw the portrait that Gary Italiander took, I saw something of myself in all the thousands of photographs that have been taken of me that I had never seen before. I actually looked at myself in a different way to all the other pictures that had been taken. And in fact, after he passed away, his wife contacted me and said, there's no question it was the best photograph ever taken of him, which was lovely to hear. But you referred to the photograph I did in Nigeria, and that was the biggest production photograph I've ever done. And while I was there, and we didn't have a brief to work to, and I had taken video people with me to do video side of things, I came up with I had this creative thought to, effectively, they weren't flying for another week. They hadn't the airline was right at the very beginning. And I said, you have an opportunity to take a photograph here, to create an image, which next week you're able to do, because this will be impossible. And they said, the managing director said to me, what is it? And I said, well, and I did a sketch on a piece of paper, and I said, basically, we put the airplanes in the shape of a flower, and we put the people in the middle and photograph everybody who's here, which was, I don't know, 200-300 people. He said, I like that. And setting that up, which I had no part of, other than saying this is how I want it done, took most of the day to get the planes in position. And then, for me, as you said, to walk out and effectively go click. And before I took the photograph, before the people came out, behind the aeroplanes, is the hangar. And when the aeroplanes were first in position, I had to come through the hangar to get out onto the airfield. And I suddenly realised it was a fantastic shot of just the aeroplanes from behind, which I took, and it's one of my favourite shots that I've taken. But you refer to the going click. Now, the other side of that is that when you take a photograph, when I photograph in the studio, most of my sittings, because it's synthetic light with flash, I'm shooting at about 125th of a second, which means that I would have to take 125 pictures to get 1 second of time. And that means, particularly when I'm photographing children, it doesn't matter what the children do during the session. But that split second when I go click is what I'm capturing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the session, if I've taken 30 pictures, it's a 30th of a second that I've recorded. I haven't recorded a whole, you know, it works out at about probably less than that, in fact, because if you work out the technicalities. Anyway, so it's quite interesting. I've had people say to me in the studio, oh, the kids were terrible, you haven't got anything. But what I've actually got are wonderful photographs that they didn't see because they're a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
But I'm capturing that bit. And that's what it's all about. And also, when you're doing it, you're in control. You're actually controlling what you do. So when I position lights, because it's all about photography, painting with light, but it is where you position your lights, and you position your camera, and you position your people, and what you get them to do. And that moment when it's all right, and you go click, that's the art. And I've done pictures where I've done this with lots of kids, but with my own kids, difficult to photograph your own children, but give them something to do. I've got pictures I took of them when they were very small, 3 and 5 or 3 and 6 or whatever it was, and they are doing something. Maybe they're playing with a puzzle, or maybe my daughter, who's older, is reading and showing pictures in a book to my son, and they are integrated into what they're taken up with what's going on. They're not interested in what I'm doing. In fact, they're oblivious to it.
Yeah.
And you're creating great photographs, and while it's happening, you're watching it. You can move around them, and you can take the pictures. So these are important elements to creating images. But coming back to what we started talking about, the most important thing is that things don't happen instantly. If you do the lottery and your number comes up and you're lucky, you're an instant winner. You're an instant wealthy person if you win a lot of money. But you didn't work for it. You didn't earn it.
Yeah.
Because you haven't done anything other than put some numbers on something and you were lucky. But when you create something, if you're writing a book, or you're creating an image, or you're doing a this or a that, whatever it is, it takes time, and it takes thought, and it takes care, and it takes lots of these elements.
And this is one of the kind of real important points that if you're watching this, I want people to really take some time to just digest. Is in order to be able to leave some form of a legacy in life, and this is what you've done multiple times through telling other people's stories. And the power of the story. The story doesn't come because I guess there are two types of stories. There's those that are made up, fantasy and science fiction and that kind of thing, and then there are those stories that are based on fact, and based on life experience.
Yeah.
And when I look at people that I deal with and work with that are trying to become an authority in their space, whether it be on LinkedIn, social media, in the news, wherever it is, the part that really grabs people's attention and resonates with people is the journey that people have gone on, the story of the fact that, hey, it didn't come overnight. Because if it did, then it would lose so much of its impact.
Yeah.
And each one of us have our own story to tell, our own journey that we've traveled. But one of the things that you've really mastered in the last few years, and this is why you're now a speaker and you go out and not necessarily tell stories, you tell because for me a story sometimes is made up. You share real life stories, experiences, and memories that people forget that, and I see this instantaneous gratification side of things on social media or the news on a regular basis, where people just post an ad like, just buy from me. And it's like, well, why? Why should we? And this is where value changes. And this is, you've touched on so many of these things today about, the experiences that went into, and when you spoke about, well, I'm just a photographer, I do weddings and things like that, but then mentioning, well, you worked at Harrods and you photographed all these incredible people, and that didn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
And this is what increases the value of working with somebody like yourself, as an example. So, individuals watching this need to realize that each one of them have been on their own journey, and it's that story that builds value.
And sometimes you need to step back a little bit and kind of think about what you're doing and how you're approaching it, and whether you need to change the direction that you're going in. And I've always worked. I'm not a mass production person. That's not the way I've ever worked. I wouldn't like to work like that. I've never worked in a studio where people are coming in every half an hour, and financially that's probably great, but it's just never been my way of working. That would not have worked for me, because I give people time. Time is very, very important. Sharing time with people, but also you get involved with the kind of people I've worked with. You actually get to know the people, and in some cases you get to know them over a long period of time, and you work with them. The Nigerian airline I worked with, the family I worked with for over 20 years on, see their kids growing up, photograph them in many different scenarios and so on. So it's it isn't, these things are not instantaneous. And I know that you were asking me about my next book, which is to do with the development of the book I've just written about my father's experiences during the war. Which was called My Father's War. I haven't got a title for my next book yet, but it's actually a development because it's actually my father's artwork. And after he passed away, we moved all of his painting, everything that he had done that was in his library, came to my studio. And I knew there was a lot of things there, but there's probably upwards of 700 works of art.
Wow.
And they're a mixture of fine art painting, of illustrations, because he was an international illustrator, and cartoons, because he was also a great cartoonist. And so I decided to do a book which shows a lot of this work. It won't show everything, because otherwise pictures would be too small, and I want them to be something where you can really see them. But starting to go through the pictures and photograph them to create the collection, I'm seeing stuff that I didn't even know that he painted. And you mentioned that we actually worked very closely together on a lot of things, and quite often I would give him ideas of things to do, and we did some work where we actually did a combination we called duet, where we actually I put a photograph onto canvas, and then he would paint with it, and that was very significant as well. There's one just behind me, but I don't think it can really be seen here, but it's just behind me on the wall here. There's another one up there, and that combination was something where we talked a lot about art. We talked a lot about the different processes involved in what we both did, And so this new book will be a collection of all those things. And I've realized more and more that my father's work was absolutely stunning and really outstanding. And his story's never really been told, which is very sad. But part of my legacy for my father is to tell his story in those images.
So, a couple of questions on that, very quick ones. One, you're at the start of photographing all of this. Have you got a timeline of when you want to get this book published?
So this book will be the quickest book I've published without doubt. I need to have it finished by February next year.
Wow.
And the reason for that, there won't be a lot of words in it. There don't need to be. But I've already got some things happening where people want this book to be part of it. My sister and I have donated some of my father's work to the Dame Vera Lynn Memorial Fund, and that will be auctioned next year. And this book of all his work will be integral to that. And there's another charity that I'm involved with because basically this work that's been left, I would like it all, probably 98 to 99% of it, to benefit charities. There's no way that we can't display it. There's just too much of it. So therefore, there's no point in keeping it just taking up room. And I think that I know that my father would have been delighted, whichever they are. So at the moment, that's one of the things that I have in my mind as to which charities to work with that will work well. But the Vera Lynn Memorial Fund is one that I have the connection with due to the fact that she wrote the foreword for my latest book, and I've built quite a connection with the people connected with that charity because of that.
So that leads me nicely in as we wrap up into one of the key things that a lot of people miss out on in this instantaneous life that we seem to be wrapped up in right now, where digitally information is just it's going so quickly, and very few people take a breath, as it were, to just appreciate the moment. And that's why for me, I always love photography, and photography is such a powerful thing because it captures a moment in time, and then it tells so many stories if the composition is thought about. And this is one of the things you're so talented at doing, is capturing multiple things, so that when somebody looks at an image, and I look at some of the images around here, if you knew anything about the individual, then it kind of comes out of the image, and you can sit there and think, yes, well, they enjoyed this, or they liked that, or this is the kind of thing. And there's so many things that kind of come out of the photo, and it's, as you say, it's a fraction of time. But if captured correctly, and this is why photographers, through that creative mind, to be able to literally take all this information and just go and bring it down to one frame is that is talent. And I don't think, no matter how incredible technology becomes, that's still gonna need human intervention. Even though AI creates a lot of interesting things, there's just that human element, being able to have that emotion in an image. But one of the things that you've spoken about throughout our conversation is relationships. Where they're not relationships because you've got a name and number, and now all of a sudden, something has happened. These are relationships you built over time. Like you talk about the Nigerian airline, you remained in contact afterwards. It became a relationship that went beyond just a click and a photo. But in order to get the click in the photo, the relationship had started way before. So, things like the book that you're writing now, again, it's all come together through various relationships. And this is one of the things that I really want, how important, I mean, in your own words, if you could put emphasis on building relationships when networking with people, what are your thoughts on that? How do you go about that? How important is it? Just very quick.
So it's for me, it's very, very important. I probably years ago didn't really put so much emphasis into the networking side of things, albeit I was doing it without really thinking about it. I wasn't going out to do that. But today I do it much more because I think that meeting people and finding people that you can build a connection with that's worthwhile. So you've also got to kind of look at something and think, not just that this person's not going to benefit me financially from a business point of view, but on the things that I do, there are connections that you make which are significant. And sometimes something happens and it takes you in a direction. And I always say to people that when I did my talks, I start off by saying my life has been built up of doors. You enter a door, you don't know if it's a good door to go through. We've had a few prime ministers who went through number 10. It wasn't a great door to go through. But when you get through the door, then there'll be other doors. And if that door isn't good, you'll go through another door, and maybe that door will be better. And if it's not, there'll be other doors. And for me personally, life is very much things happen.
Yeah.
Not everyone has that thing in that way, but for me personally, things happen, and a lot of it is caused by me because of the things that I do. I did a charitable event. I needed to get the right sort of backing. At the time, the Prime Minister was Gordon Brown. I had a letter from Gordon Brown supporting what I was doing. I had a letter from David Cameron, who was the leader of the opposition. And I said, we're doing an opening for this event, and a member of the royal family coming would be great. And people said, that's never going to happen. And Princess Michael of Kent came and opened the event, which was something that I created, that situation. It's about making things happen, and I'm very, very good at that. And I don't look at something and go, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. Very much the opposite. I go, there's no reason why you couldn't do that. But if you don't, it's a bit like starting to write a book. If you don't put the first step forwards, it won't happen. If you don't put pen to paper, you won't write a book. Or fingertips to keyboard, you won't write a book. You have to start, and you have to have an intention to move in a direction to make things happen.
So it's a lot of it's, in a way, reverse engineering and looking at where you want to be, and then what steps do I need to take.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
it might not be a clinical simple approach, but having the different ideas culminate in the outcome, but also the journey, but it adds to the story.
And part of the excitement is you don't know what's going to happen. If you can put a plan into action, and the plan might or might not work, because we all know that you plan something and other things happen. You know that yourself because of incidents that have happened to you in the last 2 or 3 years, and you plan something and then something happens and it just doesn't work in that way, or there's a cancellation or whatever. But you have to have some thought process of the direction that you're going into, and that's the thing that moves you forwards. And you make decisions that you think will be where you want to be, but other things might, because you made certain direction, and with LinkedIn, you've now made huge numbers of connections with people. But what you don't know is that somebody's going to call you today or tomorrow or next week, and it's going to spark something where you go, wow, I never thought that would be happening. Because that's the great thing about the things that we do, where it's creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of wrap up, a couple of things. One, for people that want to kind of reach out and connect with you, because I know how busy this man is. I mean, it's unbelievable, and he still makes time to play tennis.
A lot
of tennis. But for those that want to reach out and connect with you, what type of people are you looking at connecting with right now?
So I'm open to connecting with everybody and anybody, and sometimes people get the impression that because of the work I've done and because I was at Harrods and so on, that I'm crazily expensive and they couldn't possibly come to me. And that's not true at all. My pricing structure is very much in line with most other photographers. I'm not trying to to price myself out of the market. I'm available to do work for people. I'm also a specialist in photographic restoration, which I love doing, and that's taking an old or damaged photograph and repairing it. And I've done, I mean, again, I've done work for some significant people, kings and queens and so on. But I've done work for lots and lots and lots of people that are not famous, but they see the results of what I achieve and go, wow, that's fantastic. And then once that's been done, then we can talk about what they want to end up with. So for me personally, I'm still working. I'm having a lot of fun. I love what I do, and I'm available to continue working.
Good. And definitely speaking. The speaking side of things, you've got tons of stories to share. But
Yeah.
I think through the wealth of experience, if you're really listening to what Gary is saying, and you say it almost like it's just natural for you because that's just the way you are through your life experience. But what a lot of people don't realize, and I know through my journey, it's taken sometimes a stage where you got to just step back and look at the actual things that are happening along the way, like the relationship building, the taking time to have a conversation, where most people are trying to, hey, can you do this for me? And it's very transactional. And that is what I really enjoy about speaking to you, because there's always, like, every time we speak, there's something new that kind of comes out of the woodwork, and you go, geez, well, actually, and you can implement those things to a degree in your own life, but just you kind of, I look at things and I go, ooh, well, actually, if I did that differently, then that makes sense, because Gary, yeah, okay, and it like all fits together like a puzzle. But Gary brings a wealth of experience in life experience, whether it be photography or music, but also your speaking, being able to bring value to people through real life experiences, and a massive wealth. But I'm really looking forward to, at some stage, will we get a digital sneak peek at some of your dad's work?
Yeah, we can certainly do it. I mean, in the moment, I'm photographing the work, and there's a lot of it. But yeah, I mean, without doubt. In fact, one of the things that I'm planning to do is also on my planning list, is to create a little video of images of what I did in Nigeria for the airline, to show a whole story line of what I created with that, which was to create a library of images that they used since 2006 that they've been using in their own story. But with the guest speaking, I mean, that's something which for me has grown and is growing, and I love doing that. And the important thing for me is that when I come away and I see the reaction I get to what I do, is that you're entertaining people.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's all about.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Do us a favor, if you've got any questions or comments for Gary, go and drop them below. This has been broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and if you just go and follow Gary's journey, go and connect with him, and hopefully you'll be able to share some insights into some of the work that he does, so that he can keep us informed on the journey as he completes this next book and then the following one. No pressure, February.
And if people want to have some great images for their social media or for their business or their families or whatever,
yeah,
I'm contactable.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to speaking to you all again soon.